O God, the King of saints, we praise and magnify thy holy name for all thy servants who have finished their course in thy faith and fear. For the Blessed Virgin Mary, for the holy patriarchs, prophets, apostles, and martyrs, and for all other thy righteous servants, known to us and unknown. And we beseech thee that, encouraged by their examples, aided by their prayers, and strengthened by their fellowship, we also may be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light, through the merits of thy Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Right. About 4 years ago, I was going to the gym in New Milford, and I liked getting there first thing in the morning, which was like 5 or 5:30. And there was a kid who was studying for his bachelor's degree in health club management or something, I don't know, anyway. But he asked me to be part of he was always sitting there at the desk, taking care of towels and whatnot. And he was doing some project, and he asked me if he could ask me some questions, because he was mainly talking about what gym class was like when I was growing up and going through elementary school. And of course, that was in the days when the President's Physical Fitness Program was instituted. Kennedy was really pushing that when we were in elementary school and all that stuff. And the first question was, who was President of the United States when you were born? And I said to him, Eisenhower. And he stared at me like I sneezed or something like that. I said, Dwight Eisenhower. And he stared at me some more. And he said, no, really, who was it? All right, one day, Eisenhower had something placed on his desk. Yes, of course. Hi, Sandy.
Hello.
And no, it wasn't a TV set. It was a thank you for your patience. It was this. Recognize it?
A subway map?
No.
Floor plan or something?
It's the interstate highway system.
Oh.
That's what it looked like on paper before anything was built. In fact, I know you can't see it, but sort of squint. There's New Haven. Okay? And here is Los Angeles.
Oh my wow.
All right? That's the template through which it was laid out. Now, obviously, in reality, it doesn't look like this because there are things you have to take into account, like mountains, rivers, cities, towns that kind of got in the way a little bit, although they did a lot to move some of those towns or portions of them. But anyway, that's the way it looked. Now, what is it that's kind of striking about that? It's in a grid pattern, right? Which means, and it doesn't really resemble the finished product, but this is how they started. What is it that strikes you about it? Especially if you like geometry. Well, there are a lot of straight lines.
Straight lines.
Yeah, real straight lines. The whole idea behind a highway system is you keep the roads as straight as possible. Why is that?
Just distance between 2 points is a straight line, less materials.
All right, it's the shortest distance, there's fewer materials, and if there's fewer materials,
Cheaper.
it's cheaper to build. Exactly, all that. Well, this is what the Romans did, except the Romans didn't have as much to move out of the way as you did. We're talking from one side of the continent to the other with the United States. What the Romans were talking about as the empire grew, of course, we're talking about, let's say, Ethiopia to the border of Scotland, all right, to France, not into Germany, because that's where the Goths are, and they're barbarians, and also over into what's now Turkey. So, before it was even an empire, the Roman Republic laid out a grid, and as they conquered new territory, they would add to the grid, because one of the things they discovered, what was the 2 reasons for the U.S. interstate system?
Evacuation.
What were the 3 reasons for the U.S. interstate system?
Supplies and stuff.
Yeah, it was military in nature originally. Yeah, how do we move when the Soviets come to invade us? How do we move tanks and weapons and soldiers and everything else quickly and efficiently here and there? And then the side effect, of course, of that was, it's fairly good for commerce, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I remember when they finally finished Interstate, help me here, 71 in Ohio. What used to be a debilitating drive from Cleveland to Columbus was suddenly a drive we could make for Sunday dinner, and then expect to be back the same day. Well, that's, imagine if you're delivering things, or if you're relying on businesses or portions of a business staying in contact. It's perfect for that. And the Romans realized we can move troops faster, we can back them up faster, but also we can trade, which was the main reason they were conquering all these territories and all these cultures. The thing we can do is enable trade, and things will move much more quickly, and the empire, well, the republic will grow, eventually it would grow into an empire, and as the republic and empire grew, well, so did the highway system, to the point where it became something that is kind of one of those marvels of engineering, and still exists to this day. There are streets in London, and even though there's a lot of stuff paved up on top of them, there were originally Roman roads. You can go to Cambridge in England, not far from the university, and walk hand in hand with your person of special interest to this day, and look down and realize you're walking on this very pleasant path that's actually a Roman road, and that hasn't been touched for 1,600 years. That's how well built those things were, and they're all over the place. All right, the Romans decided, this is how, when do you think they started building the highway system?
After the wagon, the horse and buggy.
After you mentioned the wheel, yeah? Okay. Well, a lot of people think it was during what's known as the Pax Romana, the Age of Peace, which, yeah, it was way before that. The Roman version of the grid plan was produced in 450 BC. So, in other words, almost half a millennium before the birth of Jesus, this highway system was already begun. It was already being built. And so that's what they did. They started putting it together. But what's the problem? If you're building an ever-expanding highway system, what's your main issue?
Maintenance.
Yeah, and maintenance costs money. Building it costs money. Maintenance costs more money and is perpetual, and it requires a huge workforce. So, what do you do?
Slaves people.
Well, you have slaves, yeah. But slaves, they're not...
I know you have to feed them, but...
Yeah, and they're not always renewable. They're not always a renewable resource. There's the kind of ebbs and flows of the market.
That's why you conquer things.
Yeah. The Romans weren't that high on slaves. And remember, too, when you see slaves, especially that are referred to in the New Testament, they had a different... We always, because we're Americans, we always think of our experience of slavery. But the Roman experience was different. That was essentially people who were educated sometimes in a particular way or in a particular craft, but couldn't pay for that education, couldn't receive it otherwise, so they would be members of a household. So if you were a Roman citizen, let's say by the 1st century BC, if you were a Roman citizen, your doctor was a slave, right? Your lawyer was a slave. I'm sure it feels that way sometimes. Your accountant was a slave, your teacher was a slave, your the musicians were slaves. So the idea of slavery was a little different. And so having laborers, well, those were often prisoners of war. And again, it's not always that renewable a resource. What's the thing they always want to get into an argument with in Congress about things like, Social Security.
Taxes.
The term privatization? All right. So what if we build roads, and we have roads that we're real serious about? Those will be the government roads. And then we'll have roads that are kind of secondary, and those will be privatized roads under certain conditions. And then there'll be a third group of roads, and we'll talk about that. That's the interesting part. But there has to be a lot of rules for that, and there were. So they came up with this thing known as the Law of the 12 Tables. This is kind of interesting. That really is tables, trust me. They said, among other things, the road should be 8 feet wide. Now, obviously, they didn't use feet, but are 8 feet. So 8 feet wide, except on a corner, when it should be, these are Romans now, how do Romans think?
In terms of charity? 10.
16, 2 times 8. You know that, and you know how Romans think about everything.
Huh?
Right?
Yeah.
How many men in a company in the Roman army? I'll give you, they are led by a centurion.
Wow.
There you go. How many men in a regiment? 1,000. See? Oh yeah. The Romans. You know, the 8 feet, of course, was based on the width of the wheeled vehicles they were using, and they wanted to make sure there'd be two-way traffic. 16 feet, obviously, when you're on a corner, you're going to need more room, especially when you're operating a vehicle that's being, well, let's call it 2 horsepower. Okay? When you're operating a vehicle like that. All right. So, their entire identity as a culture got invested in this road system. Now, the Romans were interesting because they remind me of the late 20th century Japanese. You know, the Japanese, they took a look at the American car market, and they saw this car that sold well, made by Ford, and Ford was okay with it. They were a little indifferent with it. They didn't always market it as they should. The Ford Taurus, and Honda, and Nissan, and Toyota looked at the Ford Taurus and said, that's a huge market. Affordable, mid-sized, sturdy, comfortable, 4-door sedans. And Ford's the only one really making one that's you know, worth it. And they're not really marketing it. So the Japanese simply bought a Ford Taurus, actually 3 of them, took it apart, saw where it was good, saw where it wasn't, and created the Accord, the, what is it, the Stanza, I think? And the Camry, yeah, which are still around and still sell like crazy. Because the Japanese knew, all right, take what the culture has, assimilate it, make it better, and use it for your own, you know, for your own purposes, for your own, well, generating your own wealth, for your own commerce. The Japanese did it with all sorts of things. The Chinese are doing it now. We did it for a very long time and still do it in small ways, especially with electronic things. The Romans invented that whole process. They would march into Greece. What did they like about the Greeks, by the way? They liked the food, by the way. They did like the food. They didn't exactly copy it, but they liked the food. What did they take from the Greeks? One big thing. Oh, their entire religious system. All right? They liked the whole thing. Oh, Zeus and the whole gang, right? Okay, well, let's take them, except we can't call them Greek names, so it's Jupiter and the whole gang. But you know, the stories stayed the same. Greek mythology and Roman mythology are virtually identical. It's just that the names of the participants are different. All right, they invaded North Africa. They invaded the Carthaginians, and the Carthaginians had some really interesting things. Carthaginians had this really fascinating kind of armor that was made out of heavy leather straps. And the Romans thought that looked pretty good. They made it look, you know, these are pre-Italians, so they made it a little more stylish. But they adopted that. They saw the Ethiopians had some really interesting swords that were short and easier to use in close quarters combat. So they took those, and they matched it with shields that they could sort of hook the enemy soldier with the shield, move in close with the short sword. And you know, they won many battles and campaigns that way. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, well, the Carthaginians, I was mentioning them. You know what they took from the Carthaginians? The Carthaginians were doing something that was absolutely brilliant. They'd come up with a method of execution that scared people so badly that they wouldn't commit the crime for which the person had been executed.
Put their head on a pike.
Crucifixion. They assimilated crucifixion from the Carthaginians. 200 years before they tapped Jesus up, interestingly. So they've been doing that for a time. Yes, they were good. So they scoured the Republic and then later the Empire for the best engineering ideas, and they got very invested in making this as good as they possibly could, because this road or series of highways will connect the entire Republic, will connect eventually the entire empire, and it'll be known by its roads. Whenever you enter, cross a border and you find yourself on a proper highway such as you cannot find anywhere else in the world, you know you're on the property of Rome, wherever that may be. All right? It could be in the middle of France, but that belongs to Rome. You can be up by what's now Newcastle, England. Rome owns that. Thank you very much. All right, so they had to come up with this system. And since I'm having trouble bending over today, I'm going to start on the page. All right. The law, let me get it, because again, this is the Romans, and they like laws. My goodness, they like laws. All right. They established 3 definite rights in terms of usage of the highway system. All right. The first is the right of going. That's what it is in English. Doesn't translate very well. That meant that's eminent domain. All right? We can establish a road anywhere we need one. Why? To keep it as straight as possible. So if you have to cross somebody's land, we're crossing your land. This is ours now. We'll make it worth your while. We'll give you, you'll be able to use this road when others can't. That's a pretty good deal, actually. All right, the right of going. Then there was the right of driving. And not like in Saudi Arabia. Right? That means you were allowed to use animals and wheeled vehicles on the road. If you think that sounds a little odd, what is it that animals and wheeled vehicles do to roads?
Break them up.
They tear them up awful. Also, animals.
Poop.
Yeah, I mean, you picture a guy stopping every so often with a bag to pick up after. Oh, God, can you imagine hot summer day in southern Italy? And there's just been a whole caravan, horse-drawn caravan that's come through. This is one of the ways you could find enemy soldiers in their encampment. You could smell their horses. Or except in the case of Hamlet. They smelled his elephants. Did I ever tell you about the first job I ever had? Oh, I'm so proud of this. I'm sure I have. It was a great job. I worked for the circus. The Clyde Beatty Circus. They were in town. I got a job. I was hoping I'd work with the trapeze girls, but and the guy that ran around came and he handed me a snow shovel. And I was wondering, I said, it's July. Why are you here? And the simplest job description I ever received. He said, walk behind the elephants. Yeah, that was disturbing. All right. The right of driving means, vehicles will be allowed to use it, but of course that means the roads have to be really good, really sturdy, and really strong. All right. By the way, that's another advantage of a sturdy road. Did you ever hike a trail? What's the difference between a rough trail and a smooth trail? It's easier to travel. Do you travel faster? Are you less likely to injure yourself? Yeah. Is it easier to carry things? Right. Okay. And finally, there's this brilliant idea. The via. Simply known as, in English, the way. The way. Wide, sturdy, maintained by the Roman government, and designed for use by all. All right? Now, you're coming down the road, you've got your cart, it's filled with damask cloth that you picked up in Syria somewhere, all right, and a contingent of legionnaires are coming the opposite direction. Who has right-of-way? Right, okay, you're with a contingent of legionnaires and you're moving down the highway, right? And a Roman senator is approaching. Who has the right-of-way?
Second.
All right, very good. You're a senator, you're walking down the road, and somebody's coming in your direction. It's a pregnant woman. Who has the right-of-way?
Senator.
Pregnant woman. Yeah, empires have to procreate. So, yeah. Yes, madam. In fact, usually they just pick them up and take them. All right. Okay, here we go. All right. You could not use a cart within the boundaries of a city. All right? It just got too crowded. Ever been to Rome?
Yeah.
Ever gone driving in Rome?
No.
Do they have traffic laws?
No.
The rumor is they do, but
Not obeyed.
Not obeyed. Does anybody pay attention? No, there's absolutely nothing. Okay, so, and you get to some of those great plaza-like circles, and it's every person for him or herself, so, yeah. And that's apparently a very old tradition among the Romans, and so it just was a lot easier if they just said, okay, right, the carts stop here at the boundaries. Now remember, Rome was a big city, but it wasn't the size of modern Rome. It wasn't even the size of Waterbury. All right, so we're not talking about a huge area where carts were disallowed, but still, that was something that had to be taken into account. All right, now, are you still excited by this?
Yeah.
Have I killed you? Okay. All right, here we go. The via. Now, here's what I referred to before. There would be the via. Oh, my Latin is so bad. I blame my teachers. Via public. Okay. That is by public roads for public use built with tax money. So this is the federal road, right? This is the interstate whatever. Are there still vias left?
Yeah.
A whole bunch of them. Not just there. Well, here's something interesting. Let's see what I've got here. I was hoping Loretta would be here. Because in modern day London, the streets that are currently named Petter's Way, Pye Road, Stane Street, Stane Gate, and Watling Street are all vias. They're still around. Oh, and there's a street in London called Via Divina, which has kept its original name ever since the Romans were garrisoned in that mud hole that was London. Wow.
And were these roads dirt roads, or were
Oh,
they?
you're gonna see.
Oh.
I'll show them to you. Oh, no. Did you ever build a patio or put in a walkway?
No, but I've seen.
You've seen it done. Have you hired anybody to do it? You go out and check their work. You know, what are you guys doing? That on a massive scale. I mean, so massive, as I said, even in faraway Cambridge, there's still existent, 1,600-year-old roads. All right, anyway. Then there was the second type of via, which is the private one. All right. Now, let's say, there's better examples of this in Roxbury. All right. We have more farms and whatnot. Okay. Well, yesterday, the fellow from Eversource came. Actually, he went across the street. Apparently, there's a church over there. He went over to that church because there's a dead ash tree next to the shed. And it's imperiling Eversource power lines. And they went next door to ask if they could cut down the tree. And next door said, oh, that belongs to the Episcopalians. So I said, fine. But the guy had an interesting chart, because I wasn't quite sure, because I know that's land trust, for example, right? That lot over there, right? And so we measured it out. I still don't think that tree's ours, but they're cutting it down anyway. But the land trust then begins 10 feet to the side, right? Okay. So if that's owned by the Romans, then what would happen is we would be asked to create, and we would in fact offer to create a road that connects to the public via, all right? Except it would be a private via. We'd pay for it ourselves. We would have it built. We would maintain it. What do we get out of that deal, though?
We get to use it. Access.
We get to use it, and we also get a tax deduction. We don't have to pay the tax on the highway tax. We get to use it whenever we want to. What if somebody else is on it? Move. What if it's soldiers? No. Senators, soldiers, pregnant women, move. No, they have to go. It's private. That's it. But it had to be accessible unless you wanted to use it. But think that you're a farmer, all right? You've established now this essentially private road that goes to the market. Well, you have dibs then, right? The other farmers might need to use it, but they can't until you're done with it. So that actually kind of pays for itself rather nicely. And that was done throughout the empire, all over the place. And the wealthy landowners were more than willing to permit this to happen. And what's interesting is you're seeing the development of what became the European aristocracy. Because if you owned the land and you had enough wherewithal to build a private road, then, well, what else could you do on that road? You can get an easy pass. Put up a little booth. Yeah. You could have your own tax structure. Not only could you get to the market before anyone else, but you could also have them pay for the right to use your road. Oh man. So that really wasn't a bad investment at all. Okay. Then there finally, the third kind, these were the worst roads in the Roman Empire, because these connected villages solely for the reason to trade items that individual villages needed to get from other villages, okay? So these tended to be dirt roads. They weren't in very good shape. But if you combine them with the other two types of via, you've got a huge network, right, of roads and whatnot. All right, it's time for some art. Also, this is an old-fashioned magic marker, and it's making me a little dizzy. All right, everyone. Yes, that's extremely exciting.
It's a road at night.
This is, here we go. Yes. You never know when you plug these things into a TV what's going to happen. All right. This is very hard to see, I appreciate it. You can squint at it though. See the pink? That's the Roman Empire. That's what they connected with the highway system. That's 53,000 miles of road, okay? Doesn't sound like that much when you think about it, but we're talking about 8 feet wide, maybe 16, right? 53,000 miles, and that's the publicly funded via, right? That doesn't include the private, and doesn't include the little village tracks.
It's a pretty wet wheeling to get from Turkey.
It's pretty wet.
It's pretty wet wheeling. I don't see a bridge. Gotta go up
There
and
is
down.
one, it's along the coastline, but you know, if you recall from the journeys of Paul, you know, that's why he'd often take a ship, you know, to a port that was closer to the more public roads. Yeah. Well, actually, we'll talk about Paul. I have Paul maps. Oh, here we go. That's a 3D model of Pittsburgh. No, it's not. That's Rome. And you can sort of see why, I think, why carts were bad. Because look at that. Are you kidding me? This is what Rome looked like in the 1st century AD. That's a metropolis. What do you recognize?
Colosseum.
Oh yeah, well, Jack's got that aqueduct. Right there, you see it? It's kind of an orange. That's beautiful. And that's a wonderful example of their engineering. And the thing was, they made aqueducts, and then they figured out, well, heck, that's just a bridge for water. So a lot of these roads don't have to turn. We'll just build an aqueduct for people. There's the Colosseum, right? And what's this here?
Circus Maximus, right?
You ever see Ben-Hur?
Yeah.
There you go. That was so soundly engineered, they could fill it with water. And they would stage mock miniature naval battles. Isn't that cool?
That was in the Coliseum, I thought.
Oh, they did that there, but here this was,
They had that as well?
oh yeah, because it was much bigger, and they were able to actually attach these model ships to swimmers, who would then, you know, engage it, and they would actually have fire on them.
Landing
You know.
triremes.
Oh yeah, it was like an IMAX in the 1st century. Yeah, that's right. The Colosseum could be flooded too, but a lot of that was for the add a little variations of the gladiator stuff too, so you could have carnivorous amphibians. They'd love to be entertained, those Romans. All right. Oh, okay, hang on, somebody just scored.
It just started.
Oh, it just started, I'm sorry. Okay. Now, here's a wonderful example
I was watching.
here's a wonderful example of what I was talking about. All right. Here's the, no, I don't want to share it. I want to zoom it. There we go. Here's a fellow and his timorous, looks like it should be his grandchild, but maybe fatherhood was that daunting back then, with a kid. And clearly they're working the land, and look who's coming along. Centurions, right? Or actually members of a Roman century. And they have to get out of the way. I was discussing before, by the way, the use of, that armor's actually leather, you know, that they used and that they took from, well, a couple of different cultures, but mainly the Carthaginians. Righty-o, okay. Oh, this is one of the things you might encounter.
Definitely move on with that.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, imagine the weight of this. And also, when we're talking about the Romans, look at the engineering that went into this. I mean, we're still talking about primitive times. If you're wondering what the horses are wearing, You know the cloth that our, like the veil and verse and some of our altar hangings are made out of, that's damask cloth. Okay, it's damask, it comes from, I guess where? Damascus, yeah, right. Cloth from Damascus, that's covers the horses then with like the kind of structure that looks like scales, right? That's hard leather. And so the horses were protected and hot, and it had a lot of weight on them. And then they were pulling that thing, the Latin name of which I can't remember, but it translates into, oh my God, let's run, or something like that. Let's get out of here. But that's a big, heavy piece of war machinery, and that would be found on the road as well. I just thought it was kind of interesting, because again, it shows their sort of wonderful engineering abilities. All right, aqueduct or bridge?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right, it is. Why not combine the two? You know, brilliant. All right, so you've got the water supply, and you've got a way to walk in a straight line through what you're doing. Here we go. I think I've got a better aqueduct picture.
That looks level, so how did the water go?
Down, the water's down, and then it's hollow, so the water passes through, and the top part is walk on.
It looks level. The part that we can't quite see, it's on an incline, and the velocity of the incline is enough to sort of push it across, and then the aqueduct water traveled very slowly. It was barely visible. And there was also, in some areas, a kind of siphoning system that was used. And that, honestly, we don't really know that much about. I don't know who they stole that from, but I think probably it was Greek. Oh, here's a nice one. Oh, well, that's not as nice, but there we go. Let's see. Very pleasant. Still in use, by the way? Yeah, this photo is maybe 20 years old. Still in use because you can see modern health and safety requirements. There's actually a guardrail on it now, you know. So, yeah.
Where is that?
That's northern Italy. Up, oh gosh, where was that? I want to say Umbria, somewhere around there. All right, now this is what a cart would have looked like. This was found buried. This is an archaeological find. This was found buried under some earth. It had fallen over. This was actually a road sign. You know how today we have road signs that are visual rather than verbal? Yeah, same with the Romans, because Lord knows how many languages traveled those roads. This was a road sign indicating that it was okay to use a large cart. So you had 2 horsepower cart. And also, you'll notice that's a little closer to kind of a stagecoachy kind of thing than we ever think about. We always think of chariots, don't we? Things like that, but in fact they had some pretty interesting vehicles. I think there's another one here. Oh yeah, well there's a classic. That is a classic peasant chariot. It's very simple. That's a 2 horsepower one. I don't know if that can be seen or not. Let's see. Yeah, see the yokes. All right. Very simple construction. This was the most common vehicle to be found on the highway system. And you could hire people that would take you, like an Uber. They would take you on one of these. Where would they be? Would they be on the chariot with you? No, they'd be walking along next to it. These weren't high-speed vehicles.
Now, the yokes look very small for horses. Would they use mules or anything?
Yeah, they would use, They do look small for horses. Horses are pretty expensive. Yeah.
Similar to today's wheelchair.
It has kind of that look to it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
There's a one-animal chariot. I want you to know something about both of these. Well, this one is, that's a computer rendition of something that was discovered underground by LiDAR. You know what LiDAR is? It's a
Ground-penetrating radar?
ground-penetrating lasers. It's the improvement on ground-penetrating radar. It shoots out 800 laser beams per second, I think, something like that, and covers an area, and it'll bounce off metal or wood or anything unusual that's buried. And it's been used lately to find old foundations and hidden treasure and all sorts of things. Oh, and thought to be a mythical city down in, was it Honduras or Nicaragua? The city of the monkey god, which was in foliage that was so thick, they finally flew over the area with a LiDAR in a cheap little single-engine plane. People have been looking for this place for 200 years. They found it in an hour, using LiDAR. Getting to it was a whole other thing, because it turned out there were a bunch of narco commandos right next door. Anyway, oh, wait, you notice how well balanced that thing is? It better be, because I want you to try to imagine what it's like you're standing in that thing, right? Is there anything, I mean, health and safety would freak out. Is there any handrails or anything like that? I think I might have, let me see. I might not. I might have, yeah, there. Now, imagine what that's doing to his quads. Seriously, look at that. I mean, that's...
And when you're moving, it's one thing, but when you're stopping.
Oh. It's just painful to look at. I look at my ankles now hurt, my knees hurt, my hips hurt. I mean, the whole thing is, like every serving muscle is engaged in that.
And your arms.
And your arms, right. Well, that's what they look like in motion. And this fellow was nice enough to dress in period dress, too. This was not in Italy, this was in England, where they love to dress in period dress. And they have the most eccentric clubs there. This was the Roman Chariot Club at the local, their equivalent of the Bethany Fair. All right. Well, that's what you would see, though, coming and going, coming and going. That would be, the foot traffic certainly would be most of it, but a lot of it that wasn't foot traffic would be this kind of vehicle. There's another one. That was bits and pieces that were discovered, and it was using what's known as restorative archaeology. It's actually people, engineers and carpenters, that come together and figure out how they build stuff and then try to build it themselves as close as possible. So they found bits and pieces of this, and obviously it was just the metal that lasted through the centuries. But they also found carvings that were discarded and found in the soil along the old highway system that had depictions of things like this, so they recreated it. But there we go. I mean, it's like they had various makes and models of the vehicles they used. There's a nice one. Okay, this is like deluxe. This is, my friends, the Rolls Royce of Rome. I want you to look at the figure who is depicted sitting inside the power windowed canopy there. See? Inside, you see what they're wearing? It's probably a hymn. He's wearing the robes of a Roman senator. Okay? So odds are, you're going to have some status in your culture. He's got a driver who isn't wearing a chauffeur's cap, unfortunately. And it's a very nice car. I mean, look at that. That's substantial.
Make a nice hearse.
I was thinking like Wells Fargo Bank.
It is. It's very much like that. What do you think about it? All right. How many years between the Wells Fargo stagecoach in the 1850s and this in the year 1 AD, say? And look at, virtually little change in how these things are engineered. It's so remarkable how much technological, the leap in our lifetimes has been. But yeah, it's not a whole lot different. But again, as with the others, look at those wheels. Imagine what those would do to a dirt road. Even a well-packed dirt road. Yeah, that's going to be.
It's rain.
Mixed with OFFAL. Which is a very polite way to say it. Oh gosh, this is the nicest one I've ever seen. That is so fancy. That other one was actually a Lincoln or a Cadillac. This is the Rolls. Because look, you've got little Wolverines there, or little wolves, wolf cubs, representing Romulus and Remus, right? So this is probably something that would have been an official vehicle. And I cannot quite make out what this is up here, but whatever. Look how comfortable that is.
Is that front part open?
Yeah, I think that's where,
Otherwise people are crawling.
the
into
drivers,
ways.
no, it's got like sliding doors on it. The driver sits here. I suspect that's storage. Right. Well, it's a nice thing. Yes, and a very patient boy, too. All right. Here we go. Now, there it is again. That is the highway system. Those are the public highways. Those are the 53,000 miles. And again, we're going down here, right? Holy Land. Yeah, you see? There is, you can kind of see here a sea road, right? And here's, it kind of peters out, and that's a problem. But that was okay because there was a pretty good ferry system that existed here. You want to guess how long it took, if you were very purposeful about it, like couriers, how long would it take, do you think, on this road system to get from Rome to Jerusalem?
Couple of months at least.
You'd think, wouldn't you? Yeah, yeah. 46 days.
Really?
Yeah, 46 days. Now imagine you're sending a message from, I don't know, the Emperor Augustus to Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem. A 46-day, travel time, that's nothing. That's a text message back then. Things could be done very quickly. And they had a couple of other things too. They didn't just have runners along the road. They had towers that were constructed that were visible to one another. So, for example, let's go, I don't know, let's go to Greece here. Let's say there's some contretemps somewhere along here, all right? Some sort of military activity, pirates, something like, they did have pirates back then. They had road pirates too, we'll talk about that. The Bible talks about that. In here, all right, let's say something's going on here that requires the attention of Rome. They could send a courier could handle it, but what's faster than a courier? These communications towers, they were just like really simple 10 to 12 foot high towers that held one person and a flag. And there was a certain pattern, like semaphore, right? A certain pattern with flags. And they would be, depending upon the way the land was laid out, they could be 2 to 5 miles away from one another. And so, if there were an attack coming, if an army were coming, the one tower signals to the tower 5 miles away, that signals to the tower 2 miles away, that signals to the tower 5 miles away, etc., etc. Within a day, word could be received in Rome that an invasion was coming, or that an armed force was together, or that there was some natural disaster, or something like that. That's
How did they know? That's pretty cool. Like what?
There was always someone on the tower, I take it?
Yeah, but like, how did they know that it was a natural disaster versus an invading army?
well, we're not entirely sure, but we think it's the color of the flag. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. And probably, if you ever witnessed semaphore? Nobody does it anymore.
Yeah,
It's A, B, C. I mean, you can actually spell out whole words, whole signals. I don't know if they had that, but I bet they had some sort of, yeah, something like that. Again, this is the Romans, so they were clever. This was actually a little, is that easier to see or harder to see? See, now here's this road, it just sort of, yeah, it's just, the mountains were too much,
It's easier
just the
to see.
mountains, it was like, oh, there's nothing there, never mind. We've got the Black Sea, we can always sail up there. All right, but look at this. I mean, Spain, modern day France, modern day England,
yeah.
right up to, we're getting close to Germany, but that was tricky stuff. Switzerland, right, all along the Adriatic, all down here through Macedonia and Greece, all of this. And again, to be able to get from approximately here, right, to approximately here in 46 days. Wow.
And there's a lot of mountain in there.
Yeah, well, if they had dynamite, imagine.
Yeah.
Listen, I think I can make this one bigger,
Oh,
there we
yeah,
go,
that's
that's
nice.
better, that's better. All right, there we go. It's absolutely amazing. But the reason we're talking about this, of course, is because it's about Christianity. But I want you to see, all right, if you can send a courier to Rome from Jerusalem in 46 days, imagine what you could do if you're carrying the gospel with you, right? And you're passing through areas, I mean, Rome was a wealthy place. At the very least, it was a middle-class city. But imagine you're going in, what kind of territory you're moving through. It's farms, right? It's fields. It's rural areas. It's places that are victim to the whims of nature and things like that. There's places that are isolated. There are people who are living in poverty. There are people who are hungry. There are people who have not been well served by the government, and we know how people get when they don't feel well served by government. We see that all the time. The people in Rome were starting to get rather remote from the common people, which was never a problem in Rome until the advent of the emperor, the role of emperor. Do you ever hear of Cincinnatus? He was kind of the model for Roman leadership, right? He was a farmer. He got called to lead Rome. He did so for a stated period of time, and then went back to the farm. Right? He didn't turn it into a lifestyle of leadership. You often hear modern-day Congress people accused of this. You know, they've got their own sort of elite world, and really what they're about is not so much serving the people anymore, but serving those who fund their campaigns or take them out to dinner, or the lobbyists and what have you. And you get that sort of sense of what's the modern term? Disconnect. Most hideous English word ever. Disconnection is just as simple to say and is actually accurate. But anyway, well, so you've got all those people spread out on those roads feeling that way. How do you think they're going to receive the gospel? That's going to be just the best thing they've ever heard. Because as we see week after week, the entire New Covenant is about enabling everyone to belong. And so as the disciples and the other missionaries go out, they're just spreading that message to a lot of people who want to belong to something, because the thing they think they should belong to doesn't belong to them. That's an eager audience for your message. All right, let's see what we have here. Oh, okay. Oh, this is nice, isn't it? This is, I know, what is this? Anybody want to guess?
The picking grapes.
It looks that way, doesn't it? Or olives? Or something? Yeah, I thought it was olive workers at first.
And those are heads on spikes, I think.
Oh yeah, well there's that, yes. This is actually,
A little bit of everything.
this is the Roman side, I mean, when you want something that's designed nicely, you always look at the Italians, right? Well, they decorated the highways. The public highways were decorated with artwork, and even their road signs would be rather clever. This is artwork that's decorating one of the highways. This is still in existence, by the way. This is a recent photograph. Artwork decorating the highways that is in tribute to the workers, the laborers who built the highway system.
Not the ones with the heads on the pikes.
No, they might have been shirking. I don't know. It's an encouragement to work hard.
Yes.
So, I've got to say, laborers were pretty well, I mean, if you look at the entire context of world history, Roman laborers were pretty well cared for because they were valued. Egyptians were pretty good with their laborers too, except when they were Hebrews. All right, but here they're clearing trees, right? And they're tearing out roots and they're doing all this stuff. They're putting in the road system, and this was a tribute to their hard labors. That was nice. They're probably all buried underneath it too. Oh, here, this is actually better. This is
That
sort
was
of
in very good condition.
yeah, isn't it? There's a lot of bits and pieces that are in wonderful condition.
And it's still out like on the roads?
Yep. Oh yeah, Italy's filled with ancient stuff that you think, why is this still here? This is impossible. A lot of it has to do with in the areas where the weather isn't that, irregular. That's why things fall apart in New England. Is it 90 degrees today and 10 below tomorrow? All right, here's a road crew at work. And you see they're laying in the drainage ditch on either side here, right? And they're clearing it away, and they're putting in the sand, and they're putting in the stone, and they're putting in all this stuff. And this is my favorite. I learned this. This was something I learned in the military. If you're looking on a body of people who are probably soldiers but aren't wearing any discernible uniform, how do you tell who's in command? It's the easiest thing ever. It's the guy that's pointing all the time. Okay? So, it's an old sniper trick, by the way, so don't point. So this fellow's pointing away, so I'm guessing he's the foreman. And you see a surveyor here, right? Working with the plumb bob, keeping everything straight, everything level. everything precise in that wonderful Roman way. A lot of the engineers that did the measuring were Greeks, which shouldn't surprise anybody that knows anything about Euclid, right? And geometry and everything else. All right, probably a few stray Mesopotamians in there too. Here, those of you who appreciate engineering, here's how it was made. This is a side view of a Roman road. And again, I extended my patio the same way. Except I probably should put a drainage ditch in. All right, anyway, drainage ditches on either side. Down here, compacted sand, or the areas where they had dirt that was kind of sandy, they would use that. That was fine. Then we've got, what's this? Crushed rock. Good. Nice layer of crushed rock. Then a nice layer of gravel that is mortared together. A really firm foundation, but on top of, here, this is soft and provides drainage. This is a little harder. This is harder still. Then we've got sand that isn't as hard, but cements together. You get this wonderful stuff from Lowe's, by the way, if you're putting in a patio, to put in around the stones, and after about a month, you find it starts to harden. That's basically the same stuff. And then large stone slabs. Do you notice a problem with the large stone slabs?
They're not.
No, and try to imagine walking on that without twisting your ankle.
Yeah.
Or try to imagine riding in your fancy schmancy cart on stones like that.
Or a chariot.
Yeah, which, where
Two
you're,
wheels.
where all your joints and muscles are getting destroyed anyway, and then you're hitting this on the other side. Well, let me just show you, I think it might be in the next shot here, what happens. Oh yeah, here we go. This is what happens very quickly over time with the stones they used. They got worn flat and naturally smooth. So they didn't have to bother getting them in their level. They would actually, over the course of a year, flatten out. That's how much use was done. And you see again the same side view. Except this one you have the bonus of the guy, the centurion who was in charge of the work crew, and the foreman, admiring their work. It's pretty good engineering. And again, you look at geez, I don't know. Go to Philadelphia, the historic section, those wonderful brick-lined areas. I mean, you put it in with care, you put it in carefully, it's going to last forever.
Was it limestone for the stones they put in, or?
You know what? They took whatever they had available in the area, so it was that consistency in some places. Sure, I'm sure along the Mediterranean, yeah, inland, maybe shale, maybe something else. Okay, again, this is just the German version. It's Gartenflügeln and Scharfenlein in Morten. Yeah, I don't know what that means. All right, what do we have here? Oh, I love this. All right, I'm gonna let you guess.
Hoverboards.
What was it?
Hoverboards.
Close. When you're laying asphalt, you want to get everything laid out nice, or even if you're working on your patio and you don't want to mallet everything into place, although I prefer the mallet.
Oh, they're standing
You
on it
put
to
that-
push it down.
Human
Back
steamroller.
flat and jump on it.
Human steamroller. Yep. This again was artwork alongside the road, a tribute to the guys who formed the human steamroller. So you see it's in sections, right? So these fellows jump or walk, or they probably marched on it. And once it was flat enough, they picked it up and moved it along here while the other guys are jumping, marching, dancing, whatever they were doing, right? That was how it was all kind of.
And why do you suppose they had shields? Looks
Well, I
like
think just it looked good for the artwork,
product license.
Yeah.
Or they're having this,
Right.
Maybe. Here's a road sign. This is a 1,000-mile marker on the Via Appia. Still in existence. This photo is maybe 5-6 years old. It says something.
1,000 millennia.
Yeah, it says 1,000 to Orion. Good old Orion. I don't know where that is. Excuse me, we must pause. It's just a moment, I have to catch my breath. Yes, all righty. Oh, okay. This is a mile marker too. They marked leagues. Okay, this is a league marker. It's nothing other than just a not like the mile markers we have along I-95, still zero. Okay. But these were, and you know, again, still in existence, still well made, still around. Oh, there's a fancy one. That's nice. You know where this one is? It's the outskirts of Rome. Still exists. This would have been built when Augustus was emperor. Still there. I'm telling you. It's oh, here's a nice postcard of the Appian Way in ruins. This is how it looked once upon a time. I would draw your attention to this, though. Somewhere along the line, the rocks either got crushed out or, you know, covered up or something. And it would be just dirt. All right.
Speed bump.
Yeah. Well, they might have been taken up to be used to build walls, too, you know, during periods of upheaval and whatnot. Here we go. Yes, repurposed. That's in Cambridge, England. And that is an untouched, unrestored portion. Is it 8 feet wide? No. So it's overgrown a little bit on the sides. That's an untouched portion, unrestored portion of a Roman highway. That's it's near Cambridge University. Goes down to the river. Isn't that nice? Yeah. I mean, you really got, imagine walking on that and having that sense of history. That, you know, this was built for centurions to use. This Christians used to bring our version of Christianity, what became our version of Christianity, to the Druids. I mean, and there it is. It's just there. And there's chewing gum on it, and there's cigarette butts on it. And on a Sunday morning, there's sometimes an undergraduate on it, you know, who's snoring. Here's a nice little remnant. It's still around. Now, if you have a highway system, what do you have to have periodically on a highway?
Inns.
Yeah, you have to have inns. You have to have rest stops. If you've got horses, you know, they're gonna. Horses are going to need water. They're going to need care. They're going to need rest. They're going to need all those things. So there were rest stops set up along the way. There were inns set up along the way. There were also places of alternative entertainment set up along the way. And as this is Rome we're talking about, for men and women, nobody really cared. So they were not discriminate in their appetites. Right? Oh, there we are. That's the Appian Way. Okay. That's the Appian Way today. We know something else there. Now you can tell we're getting closer to Rome. Because in addition to the road, what do you have?
Sidewalks.
Sidewalks. Yeah. And in addition to the sidewalks, what do you have on either side there?
Gutters.
You have gutters. Oh God, you have gutters. Gutters for everything. Yeah. The animals, the rain, bladder realities. Also, you'll see on either side places for shops, right? Pick up things you might need. Wheel repair, all of that. I would hope a chiropractor.
As you say, splints.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Especially when you're traveling, you know, this whole route in 46 days. Now here's one. This is interesting. This is up in northern Italy. This one was another LiDAR discovery just recently. And it's slowly, and I imagine it's all uncovered now. There's an archaeological student, just sort of, I don't know what she's doing, showing us sticks. Thank you, young lady. And they're marking it out, you see, with ropes. But see, the ditch has sunk over the centuries, which raises the road. But see, the beautiful thing about this, as they gradually uncover it, is they will be able to get a side view, a cross-section from the side of how the construction was done. And they'll find interesting things in there. That's why they do it slowly. I always think about Schliemann. He was an early archaeologist. You know how he would do an archaeological dig? He found the city of Troy. And so he was, you know, that's his one big contribution. You'll learn more about him during Lent, but you know how he would, well, do you know how you do an archaeological dig nowadays? It's usually a 3x3 grid, 3 foot by 3 foot, or 3 meter by 3 meter grid. And you set it all out with stakes and ropes and string and twine actually. And then you dig 3 inches at a time. You keep the threes, right? 3 inches at a time, very carefully. You brush things off. Schliemann used dynamite. You pack it in the ground and blow it up, and then they'd run around. He'd have all those guys run around and find what he could find. And you know, you could say that he found. Not only did he find Troy, he found 6 other cities, including Old Troy. There's a nice shot. Wasn't that nice?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I wanna have a little, Chianti.
I want to be there.
Yeah, I know.
Patio.
No.
It looks like my patio. I designed my patio to look like the Appian Way. This one I was really glad to find. I thought I'd lost it. This has not been completely restored, but it has been uncovered and restored within reason. And as you can see, put under a shelter. This is a classic rest stop along the highway system that was uncovered by archaeologists, but they planted greenery here, right? You could water your horses. You could sit by cool water on a hot day. Obviously this wasn't here, but you know, you would have some shelter, you would have some shade. There was probably some sort of, obviously with these columns here, there's probably some sort of structure, some sort of roof, and something like that. But here and look at just the mosaic work here too, do you see that? Yeah, isn't that neat? And this has all been uncovered, and it's sort of like a museum now too. It's part of the museum system for the highway. It's very neat. This was all made with care and with, you know, design care and artistry. Let's see. All right, you're used to this by now. Okay, more, I'm seeing a little, yeah, we gotta fix that. Oh yeah, well we can't forget this. The other great use, by the time the Christians showed up, of the Roman highway system was to make a point. So if you're going to crucify a bunch of Christians, you make sure you crucify them along the highway system. It's like those heads you saw, you know, on the pike. Yeah, so you communicate a lot of things. How many miles to roam? What happens to you if you mess up? And depending on where you were and at what time in the Roman Empire, what happens if you foment sedition by being a Christian. And it's just a little reminder that, you know, the highway system served a great deal of things.
No speeding tickets there.
Yeah, no. All right, another LiDAR discovery that's an old rest stop. Although this is in England. They didn't even know it was there. The farmer didn't even know it was there. All right, I want to talk about Paul. I mean, anybody bring their Bibles?
Absolutely.
Of course. All right. I'm just gonna, let me read from this so I don't wander off the point here. All right, you know how many missionary journeys Paul went on?
10.
3? Okay, good. 10. Well, he was technically a Roman citizen, so that would have made sense. All right. Paul went on 3 missionary journeys. The first one wasn't all that interesting, but he used the Via Sebasti, which took him to Antioch, which is one of the reasons why in early Christianity, Antioch had a very strong Christian identity. And he got there quickly, and he got there ahead of the people who were looking for him, and he got there and spread the word, and more to the point, got out in the nick of time, too. So that was kind of interesting, but that was, I always think of that as Paul sort of realizing, wait a minute, we can do more with this highway system than move pasta and damask cloth from one part of the empire to the other. Okay. This is his second missionary journey, though. Now, obviously, can you see the arrow? Maybe? I don't know. Yeah, that makes it blurry, though, doesn't it? All right. It goes counterclockwise. So we start down here, right? We head up along the coast through Syria, across the border, Cilicia. Remember that, you know, that first day of Pentecost Sunday, there's that wonderful reading. There's all those cultures, all those languages. It's, yeah, we used to call it the Jerusalem phone book. Well, yeah, this is where all of those, there's Cappadocia, see? All of those groups are connected from this area. This is where the Galatians lived, yeah? All right, all of them were up in this area. And you can see, it's a very easy trip. Once you get on that highway, it's very easy to come down to Jerusalem. You had to pass through. Now, when this map was drawn, we didn't know yet about this very interesting side road, oops, that's Damascus, this very interesting side road here, approximately, that went off in this direction. So it connected Jerusalem, the seaport, which would have been Caesarea Maritima. Yes. Sorry, I got distracted. Which was the big seaport, okay, to all of these places. right here, you know what town is right here? What do you think? Look at all the stuff that would pass through this town. East, west, north, south. What town was there? Nazareth. Now, who grew up in Nazareth? It was right there where everything,
I thought that was a little backwater.
it wasn't. It was always understood to be one until spy satellites that got retasked after the Soviet Union fell and before we were dealing with the, what's it called now? The global war on terror, got retasked to look for archaeological sites. That's how bored the Defense Department was and how much of our money they had to blow. Anyway, and they found ancillary roads, especially in the Holy Land, that came from a variety of different directions all towards Nazareth. And if you look at the way the mountains are laid out, there's actually a pass through which the Roman road would have traveled that would have enabled you to go right to Nazareth. And then from there, well, it was like the Breezewood, Pennsylvania of the Holy Land. So it would have enabled you to go any direction. So Jesus grew up in a surprisingly cosmopolitan place with all sorts of trade and travel coming through. He would have seen foreign people, he would have heard, you know, languages other than his own. He would have seen odd animals. And think about all the things that came along on a caravan on the highway system, right? You know, there'd be jugglers, there'd be magicians, there'd be musicians, there'd be entertainers, there'd be puppeteers, there'd be all sorts of things. And some things that, you know, were perhaps a bit more adult. But all of this would be part of this grand caravan. Jesus grew up exposed, really, to virtually everything that traveled on the Roman highway system, which might explain, I don't want to overemphasize his humanity here. I mean, clearly he was fully divine, but in his full humanity, he was exposed to a broad range of human experience, which may have encouraged him to see the possibilities of the new covenant, you know, which was clearly a broad range belief system. I don't know why that's there, but there we have it. Imagine Paul strolling down there, maybe about to be knocked off his ass, about to be converted to Christianity. All right, that's actually rather dull. That's not what I'm looking for. Here's remnants still around, you get that. All right, here we go. Paul's first journey, never mind that. His second journey, the one we just saw, that's the pink, right? See where he went? His third journey, it's very interesting. These are voluntary journeys, all right? See, again, up here, using, and just think about all the people to whom he wrote his epistles, right? Galatians, the Philippians, the Colossians, help me.
Ephesians, right.
Yeah, the Ephesians, and of course the Romans. And the letters that Peter wrote, and the letters that John wrote. All right, all of this, all of them traveling this particular circuit. You might be wondering about his journey to Rome. That was done, he was actually under arrest. So that was involuntary. And as you can see, this kind of indicates why the highway system was maybe a better way to go to Rome than going by sea. Because follow the green line here. Oops. Right, little navigational error. Fit right into the modern Navy.
Is that his GPS that set line?
Totally off.
Well, Eric, you're a sailor, so you know how to work a jib, right? They didn't.
Ah.
So if you were going with the wind, you had a sail laid out like a big old rug. If you were going against the wind, that's what the guys with the oars were for. But you could get easily, and also, you know, they couldn't navigate the same way. You could easily get blown sideways. Oh yeah, and if I recall correctly, the ship needed to be repaired in Malta too. There was a big issue about all that. But anyway, so the highway system would have been the better way to go. Now Paul, let's see. His second journey, he took one of the public vias, and he visited Philippi and Thessalonica, now known as Thessaloniki. All right. That highway that he used to spread Christianity to the Philippians and the Thessalonians was built in 148 BC. So it had been around a long time, and it was well used. And that was, again, you know, all you had to do was sort of follow the Remember that thing AAA used to make, the triptych?
Triptychs.
Yeah, all right. Well, the Romans had a version of that too. And it was maybe a little more colloquial. That is, you know, watch out for so-and-so because they'll rip you off, but go here. And there were also variations. You hear the hobos symbol language in American culture. There were also variations of that too. You know, there'd be marks left in chalk along the road. But anyway, he used that. But that was a very old highway, and that's a kind of a good example of how, I mean, by the time Paul's using it, it's approximately 180 years old. And it's in full use and in great shape, and was added when Macedonia was conquered. So if to, again, connect another portion of what became the empire. And that was Paul being able to use that. Alrighty. And then of course the Via Appia, the most famous, the I-95 of the Roman highway system. It's the road south of Rome. It was built in the 3rd century BC. So it's still there. It's still being used, although mostly by tourists. But it was built when? The 3rd century BC. And it's still there. It's still usable. It was used by Paul, as you can see, to come and go here and there, and you think, all right, the roads were so good, soldiers could march 4 miles an hour, unless they were on a forced march. You know the difference? Forced march is,
2 miles an hour.
well, these are Romans.
8 miles.
10 paces walking, 10 paces jogging, followed by 10 paces walking, 10 paces jogging. Romans. Yeah. They could go, they could actually go, what was I wrote it down, I was about 5 miles an hour. That's pretty good.
That's fast.
That's very fast. So an average traveler, one of us, you know, for fully fit and ready to walk, not jogging, just walking. The roads were so good, so solid, and so sturdy, and so enabling that you could walk 20 miles a day. That's a big, big area to travel 20 miles a day. When Peter traveled from Joppa to Caesarea, right? It took him 2 days. It's in Acts 10. It took him 2 days to make that trip. That's 40 miles. So when you see things in Scripture, and you're wondering about, you know, where were they, how long did it take them to get here, there, something like that, it all depends. Are they using a trail, or are they using a highway system? If it's a highway system, then that is, you know, again, 6 weeks to get from Rome to Jerusalem. Which means Rome would have known about this business with Jesus just 6 weeks after it happened. That's very fast. So they're not off. And Pilate would have found out within 12 weeks whether or not he was fired or how he handled it. I imagine that was a ticklish 12 weeks. All right. Now, one of the problems was, oh, by the way, as far as anybody knows, this shouldn't surprise you, the speed record for the highway system was 800 miles in 8 days. And it was set by, oh, you want to guess? The most prominent Roman personality. Julius Caesar, yeah. You know, what's really interesting is imagine a cohort, all right? Imagine 100 soldiers traveling. You still have to stop every once in a while. You know, even when it's a forced march, you have to stop every once in a while. And even to cover that much territory is, again, a real testimony to how good those roads were. Because they weren't twisting ankles, they weren't going up and down dramatically, they weren't doing anything like that. They were just moving constantly. Now imagine if you're on a pilgrimage. Let's say you're going from Nazareth down to Jerusalem, right? That's the whole family. How fast do you travel?
As fast as the slowest person.
You can only travel as fast as the slowest person in your company. Yeah. Which is why, you know, sometimes when Joseph and Mary are returning, they don't realize 12-year-old Jesus wasn't with them. You know. Well, yeah, because everybody was spread out, whole families were spread out all over the place. But even then, that was a pretty remarkable journey. So when we wonder about how they were able to get to Jerusalem, to the temple, so often, for so many holy days, well, as long as they used the highway system, it really wasn't that awful. And there were inns, and there were rest areas, and there were campsites, and there were all the things that we see on our own interstate system. All righty. Oh, geez, and I was going to get to... Can I do this real quickly? Mm-hmm. Oh, there were also... there were road pirates, too. All right, you see how Christianity just used that system and used it easily. They set up stations at the rest areas where they could talk to people about Christianity. They visited, they stopped along the way, they visited the farms they cut through, they did all of that. It was a fantastic way to use an existing system in order to spread the word of God, and it worked. And that's why, when you look historically, you see that without that highway system, Christianity would not have spread as far or as fast, and may not have been as dominant either. It may not have ever been anything other than a religion of the Middle East. So that's kind of interesting. But now, all right, let's move ahead. We move ahead to the period of the Emperor Constantine, right? Now, so the Roman Empire becomes Christian. Now what does the highway system do? And by this time, Romans are pretty middle class. They have a pretty good disposable income. They have a certain amount of leisure time, such as no one has ever had in Western history before. So now what are they using the roads for? They're going to Jerusalem on pilgrimages, especially in time for Easter. Except here's the problem, and again, all right, you're going by cart, let's say, on pilgrimage from your Roman villa to Jerusalem for Holy Week, and it only takes 6 weeks to get there. That's nothing. I swear I was on a plane that long from Sydney to Hartford. I think it was. Anyway, and they would arrive, but the thing was that, you can't pinpoint it. You might hit a place where, there's some weather problems, there's some bandits, there's some road pirates, there's something or other, there's been a bridge that's out, there's been a flood, I don't know. So you leave a little early, like you do, and you get to the Holy Land, and you still have a week to go before Easter Sunday. What do? Because the town is now filled with tourists who are just there to celebrate. What are tourists like when they come to town to celebrate?
Drunk.
Yeah. There's music, there's carousing, there's all sorts of unplanned and unfortunate activities that put a strain on the, on the public trough. So, Cyril of Jerusalem, who was the Bishop of Jerusalem in the 4th century, said, all right, what they're lacking is something to do. So he created the Liturgy of Maundy Thursday, where they had the ceremonial stripping of the altar, where they had the vigil of the sacrament, where we'd have 12 high-born men, not vagrants like the Pope does now, 12 high-born men come and have their feet washed in public in an act of humility, and then would wash the feet of clergy. That's right. So he'd do that. And he did that on the Thursday before sunrise on Easter Sunday. That got them into something for a day where they weren't, as Ruth so piquantly said, getting drunk and making a mess and shouting in the middle of the night and all that frat stuff. And then, all right, the vigil quietly goes into Good Friday, where everybody's quiet, where everything is, is concentrating on the devotional day. Cyril designed that liturgy, which we still use. We still use Maundy Thursday. Tenebrae is not a part of this. That was added much, much, much later. In fact, it's technically not a part of standard Holy Week. So it's a 20th century addition. It's an ancient practice, but it's not as ancient as Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and then, the great vigil of Easter, where everybody, instead of Sunday morning, everybody celebrates. The liturgy would begin at sunset on Saturday and would end at sunrise on Sunday. That's how long the liturgy would be. And that was prayers, and it was readings, and it was music. And there was more prayers, and more readings, and more music. Have you ever sat through the entire long version of the Great Vigil of Easter? Yeah, it takes about that long, I think. But no, I'm just kidding, it doesn't. Well, it depends on the music. It might seem like it in some places. But yeah, it takes you through the whole story. I mean, that's where that came from. That was a way to process the activities, or to control the activities of all those tourists that used the highway system to come from all over the empire, an empire that was entirely, by this point, Christian. So that's the creation of that.
So when is this, like the 300s, or what?
Yeah, it was the 4th century. It started in the 4th century, but Cyril of Jerusalem was the one who's really credited with crystallizing the liturgies. Well, and then everybody practiced them. They liked it. They liked Maundy Thursday. They liked Good Friday. They liked the great vigil of Easter. They thought all that was cool. So what did they do when they went home? Well, they told their parish priest, said, hey, we did this. It was really cool. And so they started copying it then throughout the remnant of the empire, and that's why we have those services now. Whew. Any questions?
Can I bring,
Hang on.
can I bring my cart into Jerusalem?
What, I'm sorry, what?
Can I bring my cart into Jerusalem, my horse?
Yeah, you could. Although, have you ever seen a 3D rendering of Jerusalem? We'll find one. It's narrow alleyways with, in some places, 13-degree inclines or declines. And it's a rabbit warren. No road is straight. A standard road that can accommodate maybe a cart turns into an alley that you have to walk down sideways rather quickly. Jerusalem was a mess. And you'd have an apartment here, and you'd have a stable here.
Uh-oh, that sounds bad.
It's my sister.
Oh. I thought it was a home run.
It may have been. And the score is currently 1-0. Bottom of the second. The true team is winning.
Man on third.
Yeah. I think that's, no. I was reading, I linked to the Cleveland Indians on my Facebook page, and one day I was reading some rabid fan wrote some sort of stark criticism of some sort of the press's treatment of one of the members of the Cleveland Indians. And I just remember saying to Jenny, boy, this woman is rabid. And then I looked at the name, and I said, oh, it's my sister. So she's already texted me, the game's on. That was what that doink sound was. All right, everybody, I appreciate it. I went a little long, I hope that helps. So now when you listen to the readings, you can picture this, all right?
Yes.
Especially when you realize it. All right. Peace of God which passes all understanding, be in your hearts and minds with the knowledge and love of God, and of the Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you, and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen.
Let's go. Thank you. Thank you, Bob.